Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Future of Animal-Free Meat. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. This is a University of Melbourne Science Festival event hosted by the Faculty of Science as part of National Science Week. Just a reminder that this event will be recorded and the link will be available to watch on demand afterwards. My name is Bianca and I'm the Director of Cellular Agriculture Australia. We are a non-profit organisation dedicated to promoting and accelerating research and development in the cellular agriculture sector here in Australia. I will be your host for today, and I'd like to take this time to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest and fellow UniMelb alumni, Dr. James Ryall. James was awarded his PhD in the field of skeletal muscle physiology in 2006 at the University of Melbourne. He has since worked at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland in the US on a project studying the basic biology of skeletal muscle stem cells and the process of muscle regeneration. In 2013, James returned to Australia and the University of Melbourne, where he was a leading scientist within the Centre for Muscle Research. And most recently, James joined Ryall, a cellular agriculture company based in Sydney last November as their Chief Scientific Officer, and has spent the last 7 months building a scientific program around cultured meat and achieving Ryall's goal of creating a cell library for multiple different species of animals. We'll be hearing a 15-minute presentation from James explaining the science behind cellular agriculture and some of the technical challenges that the field is currently tackling. If you have any questions for James, please feel free to use the Q&A feature in your Zoom screens, and we'll get to your questions in the second half of the webinar. Thank you for joining us today, James.
Thanks, Bianca, and thanks for that lovely intro. And thanks to everyone for joining us. I think there's about 150 people online, so that's fantastic. So let me dive straight into my presentation, and then we can get to the Q&A, which I'm most excited about. So as Bianca mentioned, I'm the CSO here at Ryall. I'm based in Melbourne, so I'm currently stuck in lockdown, and the company is based in Sydney. So I commute from Melbourne to Sydney to work for Ryall. So I thought I'd start the presentation just quickly introducing myself and talking a little bit about my background and how I ended up with Ryall and working on muscle stem cells and creating this animal-free meat. So I've, over my entire career, I've had 19 years of experience in studying skeletal muscle growth, development and repair. That all started with my Bachelor of Science at Melbourne Uni in the Faculty of Science. I am definitely a Faculty of Science alumni, but it was followed by my PhD. I shifted faculties from science to medicine, dentistry and health sciences in 2006. In 2002, I started my PhD. And my PhD was really focused on continuing on from my honours degree, looking at ways in which we could prevent or reverse age-related muscle wasting and weakness. So throughout my whole career, I've had this really sort of ongoing interest in the pathways that regulate skeletal muscle growth and development. What are the things that allow muscle to grow during the early developmental stages? And then what are the things that allow muscles to mature and get really big? And what are the signals that induce the muscles to get smaller? So after I completed my PhD at Melbourne Uni, I was fortunate enough to receive a fellowship from the Australian government, which allowed me to travel overseas. And I went to the National Institutes of Health, as Bianca alluded to, in Bethesda. And it was there that I worked with Dr. Vittorio Sartorelli. And we focused on really looking at muscle stem cells. And this was the first time in my career that I really shifted away from a focus on the fully mature muscle and instead focused down on cell biology. And I was particularly interested in a population of cells that live inside our skeletal muscles, the muscle stem cells. And I was really interested in how the local tissue environment within the muscle, how that regulated muscle stem cell function. So I spent 5 years working in the US with Vittorio on this problem of linking the local environment to muscle stem cell function. And then in 2013, I returned to Australia and I was lucky enough to start working in the recently established Centre for Muscle Research, which is headed up by Professor Gordon Lynch, who's been a long-term mentor and collaborator of mine. And I've been fortunate to receive ongoing mentorship by Gordon throughout my entire career. And I'm exceedingly grateful for that. And so within the Centre for Muscle Research, I was able to establish a research stream that was really a continuation of my work in the NIH, looking at muscle stem cells, looking at how the local cellular environment regulated these muscle stem cells. And so it was only sort of at the probably 2018 that I started thinking and talking about the process of cellular agriculture and the idea of being able to create muscle or meat from muscle stem cells. And it was a bit of a loose interest at that time. And I've been approached by a couple of different startups who were in the very earliest stages about coming on board and helping out. But I really, at that point, I wanted to continue to pursue my career in academia. And it was only sort of in the second half of last year, in 2019, when I was approached by the two co-founders of Ryall, that I started to seriously think about shifting away from academia and moving into industry. And so in November 2019, I made the leap into industry and I started as the CSO at Ryall. This followed a few months of Tim and George, the co-founders, addressing all of my concerns about leaving an academic position that I really enjoyed to join a very early startup. And I actually ended up signing my contract to join Ryall at the Melbourne airport, the international terminal, on my way to leaving for my honeymoon. My wife and I were sitting having a beer before the flight, and the contract came through, and so we ended up going through it together. And it was just as they called for us to board the flight that I ended up signing that contract to join Ryall. So what is it that we're talking about when we talk about animal-free meat? And so for the context of, at least for Ryall and for the discussion today, we're not referring to plant-based products. So the burgers that you've seen that Beyond has produced, Impossible Burgers in the US, the Rebel Burger in Australia, these are all meat alternatives. So these are plant-based products that don't contain animal products. The Impossible Burger is a little bit different in that it does contain heme, but the others are all entirely plant-based. So that's not what we're talking about. In this case, we're talking about a product that has been at different times referred to as clean meat or cultured meat or cultivated meat, lab-grown, synthetic, in vitro, cell-based. And even though the adjective here differs across all of these different terms, the noun always remains the same. This is meat. This is based upon animal cells, animal muscle cells growing into muscle. So what we are producing is indeed meat. Here at Ryall, we typically refer or prefer to use the term cultivated meat, but you will probably hear me slip up and refer to this as cultured meat. Hopefully I won't slip too far and start talking about cell-based or clean meat. But I am getting better at sticking to cultivated meat. It's a pretty messy situation at the moment in terms of what we as an industry are going to call this product. So why is this of interest? Why is it of importance or interest to start producing meat from cells? And the main reason for this is that modern animal agriculture currently is a major contributor to climate change, antibiotic resistance, human disease, and of course, there's no way getting around it, but animals end up suffering. Animals are killed to produce this meat. And I should say at this stage, I am a meat eater. I enjoy eating meat. But there's currently no sort of ethically alternative for me to continue eating meat, but not have animal suffering. So I'm really keen on the idea of being able to produce a product that hasn't come directly from the death of an animal. So because of people like me who really do want to continue eating meat, global meat consumption is going to continue to rise. And this is going to also continue to lead to problems in livestock production capacity. We're already beginning to sort of reach peak livestock production. And we can see just how rapidly the growth in meat supply per person has risen over the last 50 years. And a lot of that growth is coming through China, but we're still seeing growth across Europe and the US, and to a lesser extent, Australia as well. But Australia is one of the major consumers of meat as well. So there is absolutely a developing and currently unmet need for new protein sources, which will allow us to meet this increasing demand. As more and more countries increase their demand for protein, we need to find other ways of producing that protein. So what is cultivated meat? It's based on stem cell technology. It combines our understanding of both cell culture and tissue engineering. To some extent, you can think of the production process of cultivated meat as being somewhat analogous to beer or yogurt fermentation, in that it can be done in very large production vats. But I think that comparison probably downplays just how difficult this process is. I think if you really wanted to talk about that kind of comparison, you could imagine having a beer vat or beer fermenter where you were sticking in aluminium, you were sticking in cardboard, you were sticking in ink colors, as well as all the ingredients for your beer, leaving it for a period of time, and then beer cans inside a cardboard box were coming out the other end. That's the level of difficulty that we're trying to approach here with the production of cultivated meat. And ultimately, it seeks to replicate the process of skeletal muscle development in a dish or in a container or a bioreactor. That's what we're ultimately aiming to do here. So cultivated meat, it's not currently approved for sale in any country in the world. There are a number of companies who appear ready to release a product, but are being held up because there's just no regulatory approval process for this product. And related to that, it's definitely not an immediate competitor to traditional meat. This is not going to impact agricultural development in any way in the next couple of years, because it is going to take a while to build up a consumer base here. So I spoke briefly about how clean meat or cultivated meat aims to mimic the process of muscle regeneration that we observe inside animals. And so I wanted to just briefly go through what that process looks like and the important player, the skeletal muscle stem cell, and what that looks like as well, because that really informs what we're trying to do outside of the animal in producing this cultivated meat product. So skeletal muscle, it's kind of this incredible tissue where you can induce muscle damage and I've got some cross sections here through a mouse leg muscle. And you can see that in the uninjured cross section, the muscle fibers are nice and big and pink and fairly regular in size. Now, if we induce a chemical-based injury into that muscle and we completely destroy every muscle fiber there, we can see that by day 3 after that injury, we can see a lot of inflammatory cells, and those are those many blue cells inside the muscle tissue. Many inflammatory cells come in and they degrade and they get rid of all of the damaged tissue. But by day 7, so within 7 days of that muscle injury, already we can see how rapid that process of muscle regeneration is. We can see the new fibers have formed. We can see that they're beginning to grow in size. By day 10, they're already almost back to the uninjured size. And certainly by day 23, so within about 3 weeks, the size of the muscle fibers are back to the uninjured state. And in many cases, they're actually larger. So we certainly know that 3 weeks is enough time to grow an entirely new muscle inside an animal. So 3 weeks is really the benchmark that we're setting ourselves for what we should be able to do in vitro as well. So all of this regeneration, all of this production of a brand new muscle comes about through the actions of a single cell type. And these cells are referred to as somatic or adult stem cells, and they're termed muscle stem cells or satellite cells. And they're called satellite cells because of their satellite position at the edges of the muscle fiber. And so here you can see a nice transverse section through a skeletal muscle. Again, we're looking at a mouse muscle here. And by using fluorescent labeling, we're able to identify those muscle stem cells. And you can see in the green here, 2 muscle stem cells sitting on that satellite position of those muscle fibers. So these are the cells that we're really interested in harvesting and using to create our meat product outside of the animal. So what we do is we isolate a really small biopsy from the animal that we're interested in creating meat from, a meat product from. We isolate those cells and then we purify those muscle stem cells from that small biopsy. And we expand those purified muscle stem cells on a small scale. So we give them nutrients inside a dish. The nutrients are basically a fancy Gatorade. So they contain sugars and fats to keep the cells happy and dividing. And once we've got enough cells, we transfer those cells into larger sized bioreactors, which allows us to grow huge numbers of cells in a short period of time. Now, that's the first part of the process. That's how we get lots of cell numbers. But the next part is the really important part. And this is the part that often doesn't get discussed when companies are talking about the production of their clean meat or cultivated meat products. And this process is taking the cells out of their proliferative state. So taking them out of that process of cell division and differentiating the cells into what's referred to as a post-mitotic state. So the cells are no longer dividing, but they're still individual cells. Then we can slightly change the media formulation, so the environment that the cells exist in. And we can really encourage these cells to fuse together to begin to form these elongated, what's referred to as a myotube. Now, the myotube is a really immature structure. It's very small in size, it's often very branched, and it doesn't really look like the mature muscle fiber that we're used to seeing in a steak. These things are very, very small. So the last step that we're interested in performing on these in vitro cultured cells is a maturation step. So in this case, we're trying to get the cells to grow into much larger structures. So a myotube is around about 10 microns in diameter, whereas a muscle fiber can be significantly more than that. anywhere between 10 and 50 times larger than a myotube. And the muscle fiber, that's the thing that we're interested in. That's the thing that contains the protein myosin, which is the major determinant or the major protein constituent of skeletal muscle. And so that's the one we're aiming for. So in terms of what progress has been made so far, we've actually come a really long way. So Professor Mark Post presented the first lab-grown burger to the public back 7 years ago, almost to the day, August 6, 2013. And that burger was 142 grams, and the cost of that was over $450,000. And it's interesting because back in 2010, I had a discussion with a good friend of mine at a conference and over a beer. And we, on the back of a serviette, wrote out how much we thought it would cost to produce a kilogram of meat. And we, I believe the number that we came up with was around about $700,000 or $800,000 for a kilogram. So we weren't too far off based upon the calculation that we did. Since then, Ryall, a number of companies have produced demo products. And last year, Ryall presented the first ever cultured meat kangaroo dumpling. And that was done, again, almost 12 months to the day in August last year. And without going into details about how much our meat cost to produce, I can tell you and guarantee you that it was significantly less than $450,000. So since that initial burger that Mark Post produced, there's been a huge explosion in the number of cultivated meat companies that are popping up. And we can see that moving from some of the early companies, Mosa and Memphis are two of the, I guess, the older companies in this field. They've been around for a lot longer than most other companies. But you can see, even just going from 2016 to 2019, this huge expansion in the number of companies that are looking to produce a cultivated meat product. And I will say that you can see Ryall's old black and yellow logo in this old figure here as well. And I can also tell you that since 2019, moving into 2020, that the number of cultivated meat companies has exploded even further. And associated with this is just the amount of money that is being currently pumped into this field at the moment. So far this year, there's been over $200 million have been pumped into private companies, all looking to produce the first cultivated meat product. This year, a lot of that has gone towards Memphis. Memphis closed a $160 million raise earlier this year. But there have been plenty of other companies that are doing seed and Series A fundraising as well during this time. So it's a really exciting time to be involved in this field. So what challenges remain? Lots, plenty. In terms of anyone who wants to get into this space or any company that wants to get into this space, the first thing that you have to think about is which cell type you want to start with. And it's something that Ryall is still working on as well. We're working with multiple cell types. I can tell you about the muscle stem cells that we are working on. But thinking about which is the cell type that you start with to produce your meat product will really inform that entire process, going from starting cell type to meat product. Thinking about how you purify those cells from your animal of interest is really important. Thinking about the media and the environment that is going to maximize and support your cells growing is really important. And then something that is often not really spoken about is how you create a 3D structure. How do you support these cells, not just growing on a flat dish where you've got just a very, very thin monolayer, but how do you start creating 3D structures that we're used to seeing? So things like a nice big fat stack. And then finally, how do you scale? How do you scale from benchtop to feeding billions of people? And ultimately, this is what we're trying to do. We're not just looking to feed a few people here and there. We're looking to be a company that is able to feed billions of people worldwide. So I thought I'd just finish just talking very quickly about VOW and what makes VOW different. So there are four animals that basically comprise almost all of the meat that we eat today. Pig, cow, chicken, and sheep make up the vast majority of what we eat. This leaves well over 99% of all species unexplored in terms of taste. Now, those four species that we are choosing to eat at the moment, they're not necessarily the tastiest. They're not necessarily the best for us, but they were found to be suitable for large-scale agriculture by our ancestors. And so these species are the ones that, that we eat every day. So one of the things that VOW is seeking to do is open up a new world of flavour using cellular agriculture. So we're getting biopsies and we're getting samples from a whole range of different species where we're isolating cells and growing up meat products from all of these different species. And I will just finish with a bit of a plug. That is that VOW is currently hiring. We're hiring at a range of different levels. And if you're interested in anything about VOW or clean meat, then please get in touch and please check us out on our website as well. And with that, I'll probably stop there and we can just jump straight into the Q&A, which I'm really looking forward to.
Great, thank you so much, James. There's a lot of exciting things happening in the space in general, but it's clear that VOW are doing something that's very different from all of the other cell ag companies around the world. You mentioned you're working with kangaroo cells. Can you give us an idea of some of the other species you're working on?
I can tell you that we're working on pig as well. We produced a pork ragu last year as well. Outside of that, I can't tell you much more.
No problems, everyone, just watch this space.
I can tell you that we currently have 7 species that we're working with at the moment.
Great, looking forward to the launch. So everyone in the field has different predictions of when cultivated meat will be available for consumers and what that product will look like. So whether it's a 100% animal cell product or a hybrid of animal and plant cells. What do you think will hit the Australian market first and when? And will it differ from other countries?
So I think the Australian market is a tough question at the moment because we don't have any regulatory approval. I mean, there's no regulatory approval anywhere in the world at the moment, but certain countries are closer than others. So the US is probably, the US and several Asian countries are probably the closest compared to us. Mm-hmm. In terms of the first type of product that we're likely to see, my guess will be that it will be a hybrid. It'll be a plant and meat based product. That you might have seen recently that Mission Barns, a clean meat company, released images of their bacon, which is bacon made out of plant material and celled animal derived adipocytes from so fat. So the fat is made up of animal, whereas the meat is made up of plant material. And I think we'll probably start seeing products like that on our shelves once the regulations are in place.
Great. Yeah, so Mission Barns had their, open application where anyone could sign up to try this meat product of theirs. Will VOW be having a similar kind of launch? And if so, will you open that up to the public to taste?
Possibly, but I can guarantee you that before we open it up to the public, I would like to have a taste of it. I've been Melbourne based, and having recently, my wife recently gave birth to twin girls. For the first part of this year, I wasn't able to travel because I was on parental leave. And then in the last couple of months, I haven't been able to travel because of COVID. And it's really been over the last little while that we've been running some tastings or some demos, and we've been playing around with that in-house. So several people on my team have had the opportunity to taste cultivated meat.
Great.
And I have not. So there you go.
Okay. So hopefully that'll happen sometime soon.
You'll have to get in line, Bianca.
All right, will do.
The line starts with me.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Do you think, so obviously the price parity issue is huge at the moment. When do you think it'll reach price parity to mincemeat or some of the meats that are available in supermarkets?
So, I mean, that's an interesting question, and it has that sort of assumption that price parity is a goal, and that may be the case for some products. Certainly, some of the early products, if companies are looking to sell into supermarkets, then yes, price parity is going to be an important feature. I don't think we're going to see price parity in the first instance. I think someone like Memphis is really pushing to try and hit sort of that $10 to $15 per pound in the US. I think that price parity relies upon continual reductions in the cost of growth factors, as well as other things that we use. So look, my answer to that will be, yes, we will reach price parity, and eventually it will actually become cheaper to produce cells than the animal.
Right.
But until a product is released, I can tell you all I want about when we're getting price parity, but it doesn't mean anything until we're allowed to sell the product.
Yeah, the predictions in the field range from, next year to not in our lifetime. So yeah, it's a tough question.
My guess is it'll be much closer to the first than the latter.
Good. That's good to hear. So you've already mentioned all of the benefits of having this new technology available, but we've seen a lot of other great technologies that have the potential to do good things in the world just become completely unsuccessful in the commercial world because of poor public perception. One example that comes to mind is GMOs. So gene editing can make food more nutritious, more sustainable, and yet so many food labels nowadays have non-GMO on their product because consumers just don't trust or even understand the science. The same with vaccines and anti-vaxxers. So what is the celiac industry currently doing to make sure that cultivated meat doesn't go down that same route?
So I think there's several parts to that question. So I can tell you that from Val's perspective, that we are absolutely pushing transparency, talking about the type of cells that we start with, talking about the fact that yes, we are growing these cells, and that it's not an animal-based product. Sorry, it's not a product that comes directly from the animal. We're pretty open about the processes that lead to going from cell through to meat, and that's something that we will continue to do. We'll also sort of continue to send out people from Val to speak in the community and to share as much as we can about what Val's doing. So that from a company's perspective, our attitude is that we do want to be as transparent as we can. We absolutely don't want the public to think that we are being secretive or hiding anything that we're not happy for people to know about. But from a broader perspective, I think one of the great things that we're beginning to see is that cellular agriculture as a whole is such a huge industry at the moment. And it's heavily supported by a lot of not-for-profit groups as well. That, as the CEO of one of the most recent ones, you would know that, that a lot of those companies are really strongly supporting the work that we're doing in terms of producing products. And I think things like the Good Food Institute and Food Frontiers are doing great work in terms of sort of opening the public up to what some of these products are going to look like in the future.
Yeah, you raise a good point. And I can say from my own experiences, all of the nonprofits around the world are working together to ensure that, education is key in this conversation. And during my journey into this new field, one of the major concerns that people have when they first learn about cell ag is whether this new industry will displace traditional jobs, particularly blue collar jobs like farming and butchery. So firstly, how do you envisage the cultured meat supply chain? Like, what will that look like? And secondly, is there a role for traditional animal agriculturalists in this picture?
What was the first part of that, the supply chain?
Yeah, just how do you envisage that chain looking like? Will it be very similar to the animal agriculture supply chain?
Well, it'll be very different because we'll be working with cells, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
I think, again, in the absence of having products on the shelf, talking about a supply chain is difficult because no company has ramped up to that sort of scale purely because if you were ramping up to that sort of scale and producing on that sort of scale, you'd need somewhere for those products, for that product to go. And there just isn't anywhere to sell at the moment. So there is no that clear supply chain there. Thinking about it in the future, for us, a supply chain looks like bringing in raw ingredients. So we would consider ourselves more like a food company rather than an agricultural farming company.
Okay. Yeah.
We are bringing in a lot of raw products that we on site, we mix and produce that into our media or whatever it is that we're working on, grow ourselves on site, and then package that up into a product to be shipped. But that, again, that's only on a very small scale. Ultimately, these will be companies based around the world with bioreactors on site to produce meat that way.
Great. And so will Val be working directly with supermarket chains or with restaurants?
Ultimately, given our goal is to, as I said, to feed billions of people every day, we aim to partner with everyone. So I don't want to get too much into the business side of things.
Sure.
And focus more on the science side of things. But yes, ultimately we will plan to partner with distributors around the world.
Great. Thank you. There are so many questions in the Q&A box, so I definitely need to get onto that. Okay, so we've got a question from Paul Wood. Do you think you can replace the need for cell growth factors for growing these cells?
Yes and no. Let's start with the no first. Growth factors are critical to support, particularly to support cell division. So proliferation is a key part of this, going from one cell up to two cells up to, so having exponential growth over weeks. So we get the billions of cells that we need. That involves a number of important growth factors. And so certainly at VOW, we rely upon growth factors, as do all clean cultivated meat companies. And it's one of the most expensive components of our media. Our media formulation is these growth factors. And the reason why these growth factors are so expensive is that there's never been a need to have these growth factors produced at a really large scale. So it's not that they're amazingly expensive to produce. It's more that there's never been a need to produce large amounts of the growth factors. Now that there's so many cultivated meat companies around the world, there is a need. There's a strong need to produce these growth factors on a really large scale. So it's been just amazing to see the cost of growth factors come down and come down exponentially over particularly the last 18 months. And it's really exciting to see. And I think it's going to be one of the major reasons that we will start seeing products on shelves as soon as those regulatory approvals come through. because the cost reductions that we're seeing in growth factors suddenly make this financially viable and very quickly as well.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how quickly this field is growing. So yeah, now's a perfect time to be getting into the field.
Yeah, I will say just on that one as well, the number of companies that are popping up which are sort of cell ag adjacent and are supporting cellular agriculture is amazing to see as well. So there are a lot of growth factor companies, there are a lot of scaffold companies, a lot of media production companies, all not trying to produce their own product, but looking to produce something that can be used by the cultivated meat industry to produce their products. And ultimately that brings down the cost for everyone, which is great to see.
Yeah, the rise in B2B companies is a huge sign that this field is growing so quickly.
Yeah.
So we've got another question from Andy Chen. How do we know that cultivated meat won't have any unintended consequences on health, e.g. trans fats? Is the bioavailability of nutrients similar to real meat?
So that is an excellent question. So to answer the first part of that question, what I can say is that we have just intricate control over what goes into these cells in a way that you would never get when you're working with an animal. So we get to determine what goes into those cells. And one of the things that is amazing to think about is just how much control we have over the ultimate profile of the product that we're producing. So we began to see that with full cream milk. As we started moving away from full cream milk and we saw skim milk, but then we started seeing 4%, 2%, 1% levels of fat content in milk. We are absolutely going to see that in the cultivated meat space as well. I can imagine a scenario where you will be able to potentially log on online for your home cultivated meat delivery, and you'll be able to pick what fat content you want in your minced meat. So we're no longer going to be talking about premium mince versus low fat mince versus regular mince. We're going to be talking about 30% mince, 20% mince, 50% mince for those burgers with the juiciest and greatest taste. And we're going to see that that level of control over these products, which is going to be great.
Yeah, and we mentioned hybrid products before, but how about having different species within the same product? So obviously omega-3 fats are really healthy. Could we see those kind of fats from fish in a beef burger?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I guess I'm most excited about is the idea of sort of linking different taste profiles. So I keep telling people that I'm looking forward to a day that we can start putting duck fat and duck fat that has been cultured from duck adipocytes. We can start putting that on everything. If I had my way, I'd have duck fat on everything. Love duck fat potatoes.
Yeah, I agree with you there. All right, we've got another question from Simone. Very interesting. Do you 3D print the cells in the structure you want, e.g. a burger, or do you use another technique?
So I can't go into details about the technique that we use, but I can say we don't 3D print. And one of the reasons for not 3D printing is the issues with scaling, at least on a very large scale. Mission Barns, the company I spoke about previously that produce their bacon, they do 3D print. They use a printer to print out their plant and animal adipocytes to produce their bacon strips. And if you haven't already, then I highly recommend just jumping online and just doing a search for Mission Barns and bacon and having a look at their products. It's amazing that the fat part is the animal part and the meat is made out of plant material.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of exciting work there. So we've got a question from Reza. Thanks, James, for a great presentation. I wonder who is supporting the costs of these costly projects, government or private companies? When do you think most probably will be available in the market?
So most of the funding is coming through private investment, and so certainly the figure that I put up showing investment into companies over the last 5 years, that was all private equity coming into the market. So one of the main funders for the cultivated meat space is Bill and Melinda Gates. They've put significant funds, I believe, into Memphis and at least 2 other companies. And there are a number of other big investment companies that are really pushing into this space as well. I can tell you from Val's perspective that we are proudly backed by Blackbird Ventures, that one of Australia's biggest VCs, and that is something that we're very pleased to announce. Oh,
that's great.
To announce. We've been backed by them for the last 12 months.
Yeah, and your
fantastic.
The co-founders of Val recently did a podcast episode with them, so I highly recommend the audience check that out. It's a really good podcast. We have a question from Victoria, a PhD candidate in brain organoids. She says, I'm curious to know how you'll be approaching the issue of perfusion in such large 3D cultures, if you're able to say.
So it's an excellent question. So yeah, I can't go into detail about it, but I will say that it is a critical question that any company that wants to get into this field needs to think about. If you want to grow anything that's larger than the size of a very, very, very small pebble, then you need to start thinking about how you get oxygen to the center of that. Obviously, oxygen perfusion distances are in the range of 100 to 200 microns. So once you start going outside of that range, then you can end up with hypoxic regions inside the thing that you're producing. So even a minced meat style product, unless you're working with very, very tiny pieces of minced meat, you're going to run into problems. So excellent question. And I hope to be able to explain how Val is tackling that at some point.
Great. We have a question from Claire Baumkamp. You mentioned a couple of times that the industry is maybe underestimating the difficulty associated with muscle fiber maturation. Do you have specific areas you'd like to see academic researchers should focus on to address these challenges?
So one of the things that I find really interesting is the lack of connection between industry and academia when it comes to the production of cultivated meat. There seems to be this strong reluctance to get involved with academia. And as someone who obviously has a long history with working in academia, I can certainly understand some of that reluctance. But there's just such a wealth of knowledge. I mean, muscle stem cells were first identified in the 60s. And since then, we've got over 60 years of research, strong research into muscle stem cells and all of the processes that are critical to producing the clean meat or cultivated meat product that we're aiming to do. And by not incorporating or not looking further into what's been done already in academia and not partnering with academia, seems like just a lost opportunity there in my mind.
Yeah, as an academic myself, I couldn't agree more. We have a few questions around acellular agriculture. So using yeast in this production process, as well as creating products such as milk and eggs. Is Val doing anything in that space?
Not outside of meat, no. Our focus is meat, but there's just a huge number of companies. There was a company that I had known about for a little while, but recently sort of started getting a bit of press talking about producing human breast milk from cultured breast tissue, which is phenomenal. that companies can do this sort of thing now. So cellular agriculture is just, it's such a broad term. Companies are producing leather from cells. There's a great company in the US, Bolt Thread, I think, which is doing some awesome stuff. Yeah, so just, yeah, so much outside of just cultured meat, cultivated meat. I think I've used every single possible term so far.
That's fine. We have a question from Tony Hunter. Are fat cells less susceptible to hypoxia than muscle cells?
Depends on the type of fat cells, really. So white fat cells are less susceptible than brown fat cells. Brown fat cells are obviously the ones that produce heat. And so they burn through a lot of energy, and they use a lot of oxygen as well.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. We have a question from Cecilia Chang. Could you describe some more about the science producing the growth factors? Are they also able to be produced in vitro, or is the technology currently at a level where we are only shifting cell proliferation and tissue engineering out of the animal, but the growth factors still need to be farmed by live animals?
No. So the growth factors are absolutely recombinant. So yes, it would make absolutely zero sense if we were using growth factors derived from animals. In the same way that I guess the first hurdle to anyone thinking about producing cultivated meat is the idea of this reliance upon what's called FBS, or fetal bovine serum. Now, if you're a clean meat company and you're using FBS to produce your meat, to produce one burger, you would need to have several litres of FBS, several hundred litres of FBS, which means that you're killing many more animals than you might otherwise need just to produce that single burger. So getting away from any kind of animal product is really important. And for a company that is focused on multiple species, becoming xeno-free, so shifting away from animal products, is important for us for multiple reasons. Because we are working with multiple species, certain things just don't mix. Certain animals just wouldn't work together. So all of the growth factors that we work with are recombinant, so synthetic. Yeah, the technology behind producing those growth factors, incredibly interesting, incredibly outside of my area of expertise, but amazing at just how quickly the cost is coming down.
Yeah, there are clearly so many technical issues in the field at the moment, but that just goes to show there's so much potential for people to be getting into the field from completely different areas of science and engineering. So from that, John Nguyen has asked, what advice would you give to HDR students who are interested in pursuing a potential career in cell ag?
I believe I know John. John was my master's student. Look, in terms of trying to get involved in cell ag, my biggest piece of advice for anyone who wants to get involved is get involved. Get involved from a volunteer perspective. Volunteer, attend talks, go and speak to as many people as you can, use your connections, and just get involved. It's one of those things where if you're sitting and you're doing your university degree, it's hard to know how to get into a field like this. But once you're in, once you've made those connections, it's amazing how big it is and how large a space it is, and how many different groups are looking for enthusiastic, bright, great people. So yeah, look, I think the best piece of advice I can give you is if you're not ready to take up a full-time role somewhere and you're still studying, then while you're studying, still get involved. Volunteer, help out, attend conferences, speak to as many people as you can, network, get up on LinkedIn, get up on Twitter, and just start following and interacting with people as much as you can.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely say that, you know, the more people get into the field doesn't mean there are fewer opportunities. I feel like the pie just keeps on growing. And, you know, with CELAG Australia, we're always looking for volunteers. So if anyone's interested, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn after this webinar.
There you go, John. You should get in touch with Bianca.
There are so many more questions, and unfortunately I can't get through all of them today. That's all we have time for. I just would really like to thank our audience members for joining us today, and James for, you know, explaining everything you're doing with CELAG and what VAL is doing. It's really exciting, and it's giving a lot of hope for people like me for the future of our planet.
Can I finish up by just saying, anyone who didn't have their question answered and really wants to follow up on this, then please do reach out and get in touch. As I said, VAL is all about trying to be transparent, and I'm happy to, as best I can, answer as much as I can.
Great, thanks. And I'll put the website up on the screen soon. So yeah, if you'd like to learn more about VAL, their website is www.valfood.com. You can also visit the Cellular Agriculture Australia website for more information on how you can get involved in the field, events and conferences. We've got a contact directory where you can add your profile to our database and connect with others. We've got a public Slack channel where you can discuss the science and the regulatory aspect as well. And the link to that is on the screen. I'd also like to take this time to thank Tessa Shaw from the Science Alumni team for organising this event. We couldn't have done it without you. So again, this event is recorded, so feel free to share the on-demand link to everyone in your network, families and friends, once it's available. Thank you everyone, take care and stay safe out there.